This is Flute Loops, and it's my weekly virtual concerts and conversations series, Saturdays at 12 p.m. PDT, which is GMT -7. And I'm Kenzie Slotto. I am a flautist, composer, improv conductor, and recovering perfectionist based in Los Angeles, California, with strong ties to Austin, Texas. And I just noticed actually this morning that I may have gotten that phrase from you, Humaira, recovering perfectionist. You may be the first person that I ever heard say that, and then I grabbed onto it like my life depended on it because I identified with it so strongly.
Yeah.
Ah,
Many
yes.
of us. I'm so glad that the words were affirming to what was happening for you. So use away.
Yes. And today I am so honored, lucky to have Humaira Hamid with me. She will share how we met, but it was not super long ago, and I've been incredibly inspired by her work and her words in the last year. So, Humaira, you want to share a little bit about you and how we met?
Yeah, thank you, Kenzie. The Mutual Admiration Fan Club here. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Humaira Hamid. I am in my home at my couch in what's known as Penticton, British Columbia, in Canada, which are the unceded territories of the Okanagan people, specifically the Syilx Nation. And I'm so excited. This is my first live ever. So thank you, Kenzie, for bringing my quivering baby self into this world. Kenzie and I met in the fall of 2019, which seems like eons ago now.
It feels like forever ago after all this
Yeah,
happened.
at a conference that was held in Portland, Oregon, all around an experience of um, being not seeing ourselves reflected in the mainstream world in a certain way. And it was wonderful, and I'm so glad that our connection has endured. And I want to name specifically that we have we've been meaning to do something together for a very long time, and the catalyst for us, the urgency and the clarity of doing it now, for me anyways, certainly comes from current social ongoing events that were really catalyzed with three concrete experiences. One was the video capture and subsequent spark of the brutal police execution of the man named George Floyd, um, and the murder of the woman named Breonna Taylor, and a woman named Amy Cooper being caught on film um, using her kind of power dynamics in the United States against a man who was bird watching. And so Black Lives Matter, Black Lives is the spark and the fuel that I think has opened up a lot for a lot of us. And I want to name specifically that that's the reason why we're doing this today and now. And we'll talk more about that later. But it seems really important to name it because that's the gift of now is because of what has come before.
Yes, thank you for stating that so clearly. You've been practicing, teaching, and helping others express things that are very difficult to express with their words for many years. And I feel like I'm just at the beginning of learning to express these things in words. But I'm absolutely committed to curiosity and constant learning of these concepts and figuring out how to contribute to causes that have been long overlooked and that I've been able to overlook for a long time. So I'm really happy to be here in this conversation. I also wanted to do a land acknowledgement as you did. I'm here at my apartment in Los Angeles, California, which used to be known as Tovanga, and it is the ancestral and unceded home of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. And that's the first time that I have done one of these. I would like to turn it over back to you, Humaira, to explain why this is important.
Yeah. And I'll also keep owning my context. So I look a certain way. I am not First Nations or Indigenous to these lands. I'm a migrant settler, and my roots are in the Indian subcontinent, specifically Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is a baby nation that only birthed in the 70s itself. And so I'm still learning so much that I don't know about my own lineage, ancestry, our migration story, how that then connects with what's happening here and now and what I became complicit in without knowing about it. So I contextualize all of this to say I'm not an expert by any means, and constantly putting my foot in my mouth and learning. And so, Kenzie, to what I heard you say, the commitment to curiosity and devotion and dedication to doing it anyways, even if it's challenging. It may not be easy, and it's going to be worth it. So the practice of acknowledging the lands in which we live, breathe, build our lives, love, have breakdowns, breakthroughs, or whatever it is really about paying some consideration, perhaps, and some mind to where we are, and the histories of where we are and how we came to be this way. This has been one of my guiding questions. And so the land acknowledgement means a lot to a lot of people. It is controversial in a lot of spaces, because often folks can just do that as like a performative token kind of thing. And it's like, great, checkbox done, and now we're going to move forward. So just like anything else in the world, I think a lot of it is about intention. The reason I do it for myself is to keep reminding myself of the histories and the stories of these lands that I'm coming into, and not just pretending that the story starts with me when I stepped foot on here. I just moved to these lands only 18 months ago. So this is not home for me, and yet it's home for me. So it's just like untangling all of that stuff. But my personal practice of land acknowledgement is only to recognize it and to say it. And if it sparks conversation, and people are like, why are you doing that? Or what do you, that's an opening for us to explore that a little bit more. And specifically, I want to speak to word unceded, because I didn't know what that meant for the longest time, and I just kept doing land acknowledgements. To cede something is to give something over, right? With consent, with it's a valid kind of like exchange or a gift or whatever it is, or in some sort of contract, as I understand it. And so unceded means that the lands were never given over in treaty rights, in the governance models of the new way of being on these lands that explorers or voyagers or colonizers or however you want to frame that story, all of those things can be true depending on what position you sit at. But the rights to the land, the treaty rights were never given up. And so we are a part of an ongoing occupation of Indigenous lands, and there are Indigenous folks who have been resisting and rising to that all of these years, all of these decades and centuries. And I am ingratiated and have a lot to learn and unlearn and figure out, like, how do I, bebop, how do I deal with knowing this now, when the story that brought me here that I believed in and my parents believed in was very different than that.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question? Any other curiosities around that?
For me, I learned a lot from what you just said, and that's a good opportunity for me to say, if you're watching and you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we will talk about them.
Yeah.
And
so basically,
it also
unceded means stolen.
right. It brings up a great topic of conversation for after our first song. And you said the story does not start with me. And that is so powerfully connected to what's happening right now for Black lives. I've heard a lot of slavery's over. And, so why does it matter? Because it's in the past. And so I'm looking forward to talking about contextualization as part of this conversation. But first, I would like to introduce my friend and fellow improviser, Ali Pappa. Ali, if you want to join us on video with your super beautiful setup of percussion instruments. Hey. Ali and I have been working together for over a month, not that long, but over a month, on doing virtual chamber improvisation. And because this hour is about conversation, I thought that it would make sense to have a musical conversation. Improvising together involves being willing to take risks of creativity and trusting that the other person is going to catch you. It involves not knowing what's going to come out of your mouth next and if it's going to help or harm the other person potentially. But knowing that you can go forward from there wherever you land. And there are a lot more parallels between improv and life right now, but I will just leave it at that for the moment. Ali, do you want to say anything else to introduce yourself, or would you prefer to go right into the piece?
We can go ahead and start.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us to play together. Yeah. We're not going to use a prompt. We're just going to play whatever happens in the spirit of embracing uncertainty. And Humaira, you're welcome to stay on video or off, whatever is more comfortable for you. Thank you, Ali.
Thanks.
Thanks, Humaira. Ali, got anything you want to share? Or you want to just hop off and come back later for another song?
What Humaira was saying earlier, talking about like her family history and dealing with the combating ideals of like, I can relate a lot to that because my family immigrated from Pakistan in the 70s. And I didn't really know until like a couple of weeks ago that the reason they were able to migrate here as a family together in the first place, or were given that opportunity, was a lot of it was credited to laws passed during the civil rights movement. So like it used to be before that there were caps on certain people from certain countries, and there wasn't a rule that could keep families together and things like that. And in 1965, when that changed, my parents, my grandparents basically were given an opportunity to come here because of that in the 70s. So like a lot of our success that a lot of people from my background, and I'm sure from Humaira's background too, like owe that a lot to Black people in America. And it's not something we ever really talk about or acknowledge.
Yeah, and I hadn't heard that very strong, very powerful phrasing yet either. That the fact that the civil rights movement was led by and for Black Americans, it was also for everybody else, every other human, immigrant. Everyone benefits from that. And so, yeah. Thanks, Ali.
Yeah,
and
thanks.
So Ali's going to be back for another song at the end of the conversation, but also I am going to be able to speak with him more at length in a separate episode of this. But he's a really fantastic musician and passionate human. So that's Ali Pappa.
Again, thank you, Ali and Kenzie.
Yeah.
And can I just say that the show of, I really loved how you framed improv and like all of the competencies and capacities that allows us to practice. It's one thing to get the language and be real heady about it, and then you get out and start playing in improv, and it's a whole different embodied experience of it. And so as folks are trying to like bebop their way through what's the next step, like that's a really good one. And I just want to name two of our friends, Gary Ware and Jeff Harry, who do a lot of things around improv games and playing improv games. They're both great guys in the States. And the key piece around improv, I haven't done very much of it myself. I've dabbled in it here and there, but the foundational thing of like, it is safe to try. And I think the most important thing for people as they're trying to figure out what's happening for them now and what their next step is and whatever it is make sure you are in a place that is safe to try, both for your own safety and for the safety of the person or people that you might be connecting with otherwise. Yeah. And when people are like, well, I have this one friend that I want to have this conversation with, it's like, does your friend want to have that conversation? Mm-hmm. Are you asking for them to use their lived experience as a representation for everything that's happening right now, which is not fair. I'm like one human being and one individual.
Yeah.
So if we keep going back to that thing of like, oh, is it safe to try? Am I in a good place? Is it safe for me? Is this person or this group or whatever it is in a safe place for us to come together in this? I think it's always possible to try to do some of that regardless of what situation we're in. It could be like just a little bit, or we have the sway of the whole space. But that's a practice that has saved me a lot of feet in my mouth, my own foot in my mouth. I will say that.
Yeah. I really love what you're saying about make sure that you, or be aware of whether you are in the right place for a conversation and the other person is in the right place for that conversation you want to have with them. Otherwise, you're sort of pushing a conversation upon them that it might not be healthy for them to have. And we talked about this privately a few days ago, or whenever we decided to do this show,
2 days
but
ago.
oh, wow, it seems like a long time. Uh, but I would love to hear you speak a little bit more about that. A specific example that I struggled with, and you explained so well. Jumping off of that example, mine is I realized, oh, my artistic community is mostly white, and now I want to change that, but I don't want. It doesn't feel right to just reach out to all the black artists I know, because that could just look like I'm just trying to use them as tokens. And so to me, that's a version of figuring out who to have the conversation with, and whether you're both wanting to have that conversation. Could you speak to that?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, human beings are complicated, complex, wonderful, messy beings, right? And I say that only to say I'm sharing my opinion, and some people will adamantly agree, and other people are going to be like, no, come talk to me about it. Don't not talk to me about it. So I can only speak from my experience, both as a person figuring stuff out. I would say when I kind of like woke up to the way that things are, was in 2012 for me in a more profound way. And there was always like breadcrumbs and little steps in the process for each of us. And I didn't come awake to the reality of things that I was asleep to in kind of like a massive rumble, the way that this has been for many people. And there's so much coming up for so many folks, and some people's way of processing is to be in conversation, right? And to be in those, and to protest, to be on the streets, to put their bodies out on the line, to have confrontations, to come together, or to choose not to engage or whatever it is. And for other folks, it's a very internal thing. With the urgency of the way that people have posted online, for some, like, urgency might be a symptom of supremacy culture. Like, some of us take a minute to like simmer in something and marinate it and figure out what it means for us. And it assumes a lot of capacities. It assumes internet access. It assumes kind of like a neurological experience in the world that lets you do those kinds of things. So all that to say, there's no right answer. Have a conversation, be ready to be like, oh, I made a mistake. And that is one of the competencies that I think I was taught. Make your mistakes in private, and being able to give each other a lot of grace. This word has come up a lot, of like, what does everyday grace and what does the practice of that look like? It's, first of all, get clear with what you need and what you want. And if you're looking for absolution as a white presenting person, or as a person, I don't care, I do care, but it's not specific to folks who are white and white presenting, meaning you look white and somebody can't look at you and be like, oh, you're a racialized person, you're a South, are you from India, are you from whatever.
But where are you really from?
Where are you really from? That conversation, you get to pass in white predominant spaces as another white person, whatever your heritage is and whatever you lay claim to in your lineage. So that whole question of just like, before you go out, even to searching online and reading books or whatever it is, sit with what's happening for a hot second and acknowledge what's happening for you. Is it like guilt? Is it embarrassment? Is it shame? Is it grief? Is it pain? Like, whatever. Is it like, here we go again? Or, is it, there's so much that can come up for people, and knowing what we're coming in with to any interaction is half the work that we can own in ourselves. And then, whether, if you're then reaching out to an artist who happens to be Black at this time, it's like, some people are going to think that now you're just being, doing the tokenism thing, doing the like rush to a visible solution thing. And perception will be perception. And what the the true intent is. And if the intent is malicious, and that if the intent is to cover it up, and all of a sudden it's like, I don't know that I've been doing this wrong all this time, let me do this now. You're gonna get called in or called out, right?
Yeah, and
just
actually,
know that
I love that term, and it's very new to me. So, could you explain what called in means?
call in, call out. So I have my own definitions for things, and this is a thing that I want to keep learning and changing so that I can attribute where these things come from. So call out, call in culture, I learned about being in kind of more predominantly activist spaces in unceded Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish territory known as Vancouver, BC. And I point that way. I don't know why. That's not where it is. But being called out is you're doing something and you know that you don't necessarily mean it. So all of the dudes that did a bunch of performative stuff online, posted things, I'm with you too, I'm going to march and whatever it is, and are predatory or unsafe for women or female identifying folks, or to anybody for that matter. And I'm not just going to call out dudes, like anyone can be a perpetrator, anyone can be perpetrated upon. And it, like statistically, predominantly, it's that like you're doing something and people are going to call you out and be like, that the words don't fit the picture, you know? And the difference that I have experienced in call out versus call in is when somebody does that with love and perhaps with an invitation of, you know, here's a next step to doing it. No one owes anybody that. And so if you're going to call people out or call people in, it all is dependent on your capacity. And I think the more relationship there is among two people and a clear understanding of like your inherent dignity, worth, and that you have a right to respect in context, right? So if somebody's like, now just sit me down and educate me this, give me the Sparks notes. It's like, no, there's documentaries, there's books, there's decades upon decades of work. But if we can come together, you could be doing something and somebody could call you on your behavior. And if there's warmth and a capacity to listen and hear and a capacity to support, or just be like, you know, do your work. There's plenty of people who build their livelihoods and their careers and their vocations and their callings around educating people who are ready. Find that person. You know, if you're going to hire a life coach or a personal coach, or if you're going to hire a marketing expert, hire an expert who understands and can contextualize and help you with the learning experience with this, if that's something that you have access to. So that's the difference that I make within call out and call in culture. And I believe the roots of it are from queer communities and specifically LGBTQ, particularly trans folks. And I will need to do more learning because I don't have that top of mind.
Oh, that's actually a great segue into something else that you shared with me the other day, African American vernacular English. There are, you know, all these terms that we use. So you just said, okay, called in, you know, it's used in these circles, and let's find out where it comes from so we can properly attribute that, because that's important. Also has to do with, you know, every fact does not live in a vacuum. It is part of a much larger context that informs how it impacts everyone who uses it and hears it. So I guess, let's talk a little bit about language and how we can, you know, without making it so that, let me back up here. I've heard and I've felt at different times like, oh, I don't want to use XYZ language because I don't want to misstep. And I love what you said earlier about like, I'm going to put my foot in my mouth a million times. I don't know if you said that. I don't think you said a million. But the idea is
more.
We are going to mess up, you know, as we try to learn and be curious and be more inclusive and respectful and lift everyone up together and with our mindsets and our actions. Do you have ideas about how we can do that with our language in a way that doesn't, that isn't, I'm restricting my language so that I don't get in trouble, and is more, I'm learning constantly?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think it's such a powerful one. And I will digress for just a minute to say that is one of the things that will carry us through, is being able to ask beautiful questions, ask really honest questions, and be able to find the spaces where those questions will be will land safely, and don't put work on others that is not yours to do. There was a really wonderful example that I can link afterwards or whatever it is, but share with folks. But it's this notion of like, if you walk in halfway through a lecture in school, whether it's high school or post-secondary, and the professor is halfway through the lecture, you're not going to roll in and be like, "Hi, catch me up, like start this again for me." You're going to sit down, take it in, know that you've got readings to do, maybe ask people for notes or whatever it is. Some people are going to say no. Some people are going to like give you their entire, like Google Doc or Evernote or Slack channel or whatever it is, right? Like you're going to get those things in. And I said something, you're not going to roll in. That's African American vernacular English. I grew up in the 90s and 2000s in North America, in British Columbia, and I didn't adopt so much African American culture as it was appropriated into kind of pop culture for North America as much. I went the more like alt rock, emo route of things. And it's a part of my language and it keeps slipping in. And I'm noticing that a lot more now than ever before, but it's something that I've been trying to notice for years.
Can I just want to point out that what you did right there was, you said rolled in, or yeah, I think that's the term you used, and then you said, oh, that comes from here. And it wasn't like, oh my gosh, I have to beat myself up now because I use this term and I'm putting down so many people with it. It is, I recognize a thing that comes from this history.
Yeah,
and that's the important step about it.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. For me, it's my practice of attributing where how I am actually comes from, and not stopping at like the first why, like ask a couple more and like see where it goes, and follow the rabbit hole. And the question of language and harm is so big. Again, if somebody's saying that this is not okay, my approach is to try and understand why. And if they're in a place to have that conversation with me, great. If not, I have work to do in the meantime until I figure it out and come to my own conclusion of how to move forward. I tend to hang back. And that's not going to be everyone's approach, but that's a way that I do it, because there's going to be no experts. You don't get to be an expert in this. We don't get to be experts in this. And becoming an expert is a part of supremacy culture, right? Perfection, the pinnacle, like there's something that you're going to reach and then you're going to be safe. Like that's not how the world might be.
Yeah, and that in itself is going to be a topic that we talk about in another conversation, because there's a lot of digging to do there. The first time I heard you make that statement, I was like, please back up and explain all of the ways that this is true. And it was huge news to me, and it was 2 days ago. But
yeah.
Yeah.
But all that to say, I will say AAVE was in a call that South Asians and Black folks had come together to organize a South Asians for Black Lives call. I went on there. It was beautifully facilitated. I am in endless admiration for the entire team that came together. It was just individuals that came to organize. And that was on June 7th. I looked it up in my calendar because I can't remember what the days are anymore. So 6 days ago. And I typed into the chat box because it said AAVE. And I was like, what's AAVE? What does that stand for? So African American Vernacular English. And just knowing that I get to use that, and the repercussions on me might be different than somebody who presents as a Black person and, you know, identifies as a Black person and lives the Black experience, and carries that representation, where if they use, you know, you're not going to roll up to whatever, a class or something like that, then they might be looked at as less professional. Like, there's going to be other judgments placed on that person using that language that are not going to be placed on me. So identifying those things is a way of saying, like, right, none of this stuff gets to be the same experience, even if we're saying the same words. And then there's some words that are just offside, like, just don't, we know the words in relating to different identities and experiences and communities, just don't. Why do you need that word? You have so much available to you. How do we get more creative? How do we get more, have more fun with this and find ways that are affirming and have everyone in? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you like me and Humaira have just recently discovered like that there is a set of words and phrases in your everyday speech that you are privileged to use without ramifications. You can just learn more about them. Now we know that we can look up AAVE and find out what a lot of those words are that we use. And then I want to bring it to context more generally outside of language. And back to what you said at the beginning, the story does not start with me. Just thinking, okay, here we are in 2020, and there has been a lot that's happened since 1865, which I guess wasn't as pivotal a year for Canada as it was yeah, that's the 13th Amendment, right? Yeah. But how do you go about, I don't know if you remember this because it was 2012 for you, starting to take in all of this context and using it without getting discouraged or without losing steam, because there are a lot of people right now who are just waking up and realizing that there's so much context that they didn't realize, that it's not just about one horrible wrong murder, 2 horrible wrong murders, 10 horrible wrong murders. It's about something that seems insurmountable that's been going on for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
How do you start?
Oh, give it a minute.
Yeah.
No, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Like, now we've woken up to this big thing. And my friend Byron had used this, and I know a number of other people use this kind of imagery of you pick up a thread, like you notice this little thread that's sticking out of your shirt, and you pick at it, and if you keep pulling it, you see where it all goes into, and you're unraveling all of this stuff. So this is not going to happen in a week or in a month or in a year. And there's going to be a lot of confrontation and, like, personal potential undoing of habits, of thoughts, internally, socially, where we go as a default. Like, you know, if you're looking for music, like, where do you go first? Who are your go-to people when you're looking for recommendations? What do they know? Because you're only as expanded as the folks that you're connected to. So marathon, not a sprint. And I understand that it's hard to be like, fine, it's a marathon, not a sprint, but, like, the world is on fire right now, right? Like, there's a lot of urgency, and that is also important. And specifically for the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black liberation movement that has been going on for a long time, right? Even before it was safe to say it in words, before it was safe to challenge it in policy, like, people had freedom songs. And, like, there are so many teachers, and one of mine is my community choir song leader, a woman, magical teacher, friend, guide of mine named Vanessa Richards. And I just quietly learned from going to choir, most weeks, once a week, and just would hear something else that I was like, oh, and then go home and like stew on that for a little bit and come back. And so I want to say, for people that are like, how do I look to the leaders, look to the teachers? There are people who have been doing this work for their entire lives, if not generations. The lists are circulating out there. Some of them have courses. Some of the, like those are where you can start to understand the bigger thing. And the conference that you and I had met at was my attempt at trying to teach this concept of like systems and context. I'm a head first recovering perfectionist as well, high functioning, highly anxious person who went hard my entire life as a model minority, like fulfilling on the dream that my parents made all of the sacrifices to move us to North America for. And then I burnt out 2 years ago.
Yep. And model minority is another term to look up and think about, because
We can chat about that.
Yeah, we can chat about that another time. It's a very important one for Asians and children of migrants that we might not realize that we subscribe to and perpetuate racism with.
I'd say, like, Asian and South Asian have a specific, perhaps, experience around this, because if you had the kinds of parents, especially if you're first generation, and your parents didn't go to school here, or you didn't go to school your entire life and kind of notched into the school system whenever. I came in early elementary school into the Canadian school system, and I want to get the gold star. I'm like, doing all of the things, and then I'd come home and be like, I got 94% on my test. And then it'd be like, where's the six?
Yeah.
And I know we joke around a lot about that, but that comes from a very deep story that I don't even know that we know as we're having these conversations with our families and our parents and our teachers.
Right.
And
so it is deeper still than whether or not our parents told us that. Like, I internalized that, I think, mostly on my own, without realizing it. And so, anyway, it's just something else to dig into. I want to make sure that I say where we're going with this as our conversation winds down. Because I said, let's talk for an hour on Saturday, and you said I could talk for 3 hours. I could talk for days with you. And I was, we were both very excited about continuing the conversation. And so for those of you watching, what we've decided to do is have 8 conversations, not as a part of Flute Loops and going forward, sort of as a separate series of compassionate conversations. And along with those, we'll be curating some resources and tools that you can use to have compassionate conversations along with us week by week throughout the rest of the summer. And we hope that it will help facilitate dialogue between friends and family and friendly strangers and who knows, and help us get to know our own, the things that we bring to conversations, and recognize what other people are bringing to conversations, and just have more of those one-on-ones. So we'll have more information about that. Just I'll have it on my Facebook page, Kenzie Slotto, and then I'll probably put it in the description of the YouTube and Twitch streams that are archived for this. But this is just the first of 8, or maybe we'll just call this conversation 0 and make it 9, because we like to talk to each other.
Yeah. And I will say thank you for doing this, Kenzie. I love how you framed the conversation. When you sent out the like what this conversation would, I was like, oh, compassionate conversations, cool. If folks are getting a sense already, I think a lot about a lot of things, and then everything's connected, and I have a hard time just giving a straight answer, which Trevor Noah, for example, I believe that he has the same kind of experience of thinking deeply a lot about a lot of things, and he has mastered and is the skill of being able to like do it very succinctly. The 18-minute video that he released last week in quick response to what was happening, like whatever was happening for him as a person, he stepped up as a guide and a teacher and a, like, here are the dominoes, and like those kinds of things that are so valuable right now. So I appreciate you containing my gazelling, as I call it, just like going from one thing to the next. And I do want to name that this is two friends getting together, working it out. This isn't a part of some brand. Like I'm not doing this as a part of my business or whatever it is. I'm an educator. I'm a racialized woman who grew up most of my life in the west coast of the country known as Canada. And with my incessant thinking, and learning is my addiction, for better and for worse, I just have spent a lot of time on this. And so I don't expect other people, I don't expect anything from any of us except coming together and trying.
Showing up for the conversation. And we wanted to do it publicly because then maybe somebody else can see it and see, okay, they're not experts, they're just talking to each other and learning from each other and learning
it's
from
better together.
Yeah, it is better together. Yeah.
And if we all need to do this work, then why do it quietly, hiding until, again, we reach some sort of like pinnacle of perfection. So this is our way of just, selfishly for me, continuing to chat with you. And I do want to name one more thing on this call that we can keep unpacking, is this practice to own your position. So positionality, or like intersectionality. The intersectionality is a term that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw back in 1989, talking about the intersections of the multiple identities that we hold. So if I'm a cis woman, I was born into a body that is female, and I identify as female, and I'm able-bodied, i.e. I don't have particular visible or invisible abilities that the world isn't kind of by default made for me, and all of this other stuff. Like in all of the there's this term called the hurt Olympics, of like who has it worse. And I think in claiming a victim status or an oppressed status or whatever it is, and being affirmed in that, I have been guilty of minimizing all of the privileges that I do have. And privilege is a really loaded term. All it means to me is that you have the choice. Privilege means choice. And specifically, it means you have the choice to not pay attention, because it doesn't influence you on the daily. Mm-hmm. So,
yes,
everyone has their own experience with that, but I own my position when it comes to intellect. I'm like, I do this a lot. This is what I'm crafted and skilled at. So even if I look a certain way and I have a certain gender identity, and there's kind of like different ways that I'm an agent and have power, and a target where I am potentially singled out or come under different things. But if I get angry at somebody, I can come at them pretty hard with my intellect. And that's something that I'm trying to unlearn. But
and your position on that. That's something that
I didn't until people told me, because I hurt them.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a great point to drive home here, which is, learn about how to own your position, and we'll talk more about it, and we'll share resources about it, and attribute them to all the people that we are learning from, or that Humaira has learned from. I want to share one more thing before we do the last song. Speaking of who I'm learning from, who we're learning from. This week I watched a virtual town hall from Black Lives Matter Los Angeles on Facebook, and I'm a person who gets information overload very easily. I just like gobble up as much information as possible, and then I have a day where I'm just like out of commission because I just like smash too much information into my brain and it can't function anymore. Yeah. But if you're feeling that, I recommend watching a live virtual town hall, because rather than sifting through lots of different pieces of information, it's happening in real time, and especially with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, since that's the one I watched, I can say that there are people speaking there very patiently and explaining the organizations and concepts that they've been working with and towards for decades. And they are welcoming and ready to talk to people who are just waking up. Melina Abdullah is one of the co-founders of the LA chapter, and she's one of the people I was most impressed by, her patience and the way that she broke things down in that town hall. And so I just wanted to throw that out there if anybody is looking for something that feels a little slower paced than trying to consume lots and lots of history in a short period of time.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
People's pain, people's anger, and people's rage is 1000% valid. I, for better and for worse, have this like mediator archetype, and I used to meddle in things that were not mine to meddle in, and so I'm trying to keep getting better at owning where I'm meant to be. And for better and for worse, I have the desire and the capacity for the kind of like kind conversations, the more like, but people's like, if you're not angry, are you seeing the whole picture? And if people are angry and people are rageful, please don't ever tell them that they need to calm down, and need to like, that's erasure, and that's continuing to ask people to behave in a certain way before you'll listen to them. Why is their anger something that you want to tell them to calm down from? That's where our work is to watch that and look at that. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. But
thank you for opening that up, and I look forward to talking about that in future conversations as well. But now, Ali, would you come back and join us for a closing number?
Hello.
Hey, over at the marimba. Is that a marimba or is it a different kind of mallet percussion instrument?
No, it is a marimba, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, I would like to, get either a prompt or maybe between the three of us an idea of something that we're going to base this song on. The first one was completely free, leaning into uncertainty, but I think I also very much enjoy wrapping in an idea or an object or a concept or whatever that may be.
Yeah, Humaira, do you have any ideas you want to give us?
I just typed it into the chat box. Quest is what came to mind. Like we're all on our individual and collective quests.
Okay.
That's funny because I saw that in the chat and I thought, how did I write that? I swear I didn't write that because we're logged in with the same account.
That was me.
That's great. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to start?
Yes, I'll start. I'll loop something and then join me whenever you feel. Wow, Ali. That was great.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Again.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. Oh, man. Ali and I have never played just duets together. We usually are in a group of 5 to 9 musicians improvising like this. And so this was
Actually, I don't think I've ever played with you because you're always conducting us.
special. Oh my gosh, you're right. We may have never played together before.
Look what you all did.
We work together frequently.
Yeah.
I can't
I'm
like
glad.
make this grin any smaller. That was
So glad.
that was really lovely. Thank you.
Oh, well, Humaira, Ali, it has been so special for me to have you both here. And thank you to those of you watching and commenting in the chat. It is fun to talk amongst ourselves, but it is even more special to have you here contributing to our conversation.
Yeah.
And yeah, so if you want to find out about our future conversations, as well as future Flute Loops and topics, all of that will be on my Facebook page, which is Kenzie Slotto, or I think it's also Fusion Flute, or Instagram, or my website, kenzieslotto.com, which is in the bottom right of the screen. Humaira, do you have anything that you want to share with people where they can find you? We can also post links in the description of this video for later, for sure.
Yeah, if folks want to reach out, I'm open on Instagram, just at Humaira Hamid, HUMAIRAHAMID, all one word, no dashes or dots or anything like that. I have gone dark on social media over the last 2 years, and I thought it was just as good as I might as well just become irrelevant, and it was a big ego death. So I don't have the website or the channels or any of that. It's just me as a person. And yeah, if folks really want to connect, Instagram is probably the best channel for now.
Cool.
Or Facebook. Find me, same thing, Humaira Hamid. Yeah.
Great. And Ali, I'll post your information in the description too, so that people can find both of you and connect with you if they enjoyed this conversation and concert. Yeah.
Sweet. That sounds good.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks everybody for watching. See you next time.